Is there a gay gene? And if there is, does it mean that homosexuality should be considered normal sexual behavior sanctioned by law? My name is Gary DeMar, and I'm president of American Vision, and welcome to Vantage Point. In a previous Vantage Point show, I was dealing with Steve Simon, who's a state representative from Minnesota, and he was offering his arguments for support of a homosexual marriage. And one of his arguments is, and I'm quoting him, "The scientific evidence shows more and more every day that sexuality and sexual orientation are innate, something people are born with." And this is a pretty well understood proposition. You will find almost everywhere online people claiming that homosexuality is genetically caused. On the other hand, there's a great deal of medical and scientific opinion that says absolutely not. There is no genetic marker for homosexuality. No doubt, there may be some genetic aspects to it, there may be some cultural aspects to it, but when you come to the issue of sexuality, there really is no singular black and white determination that someone is homosexual because of genetic markers. Now, but let's assume for the moment that genetics is in fact the issue here, that someone is a homosexual purely based upon on genetic causes. Now, if that's the case, then what do you deal with issues like aggression and obesity and depression, prostate cancer, and other types of illnesses which we know do have genetic markers? Should we then say, well, because of this is a person has this particular genetic marker, that particular malady that they have, somehow isn't something that needs to be fixed? I have a collection of these, and I've been going over these for quite some time. And one of the things that I've noticed about all of this, there's always a standard by which you determine whether somebody is depressed or not. There are people who aren't depressed, and therefore you can evaluate whether or not a person is depressed based upon normal behavior. The same thing with weight. There are people who are anorexic on one side of the standard, and there are people who are obese on the other side of the standard. There may be genetic markers for each of them. In fact, there was something in the online today that said scientists find a master switch gene for obesity. Well, they found in the Amish community that there are those people who are predisposed towards obesity, or at least in gaining weight, but because they work so hard and burn up a lot of calories, it doesn't show. But when there is a genetic marker found for obesity, and there was another one today that they found a genetic link to depression. Here's another one, a genetic double whammy, rarely found in whites, dramatically increases the risk of congenitive heart failures in blacks. There is an aggression gene. There is a whole list of these. Prostate cancer. Researchers have found a brain chemical that boosts the craving for fat and a way to block it without affecting the appetite for healthier foods. And so in each one of these cases, there is a standard by which you determine whether somebody is off the norm. And the goal is, whether it's genetic or a predisposition to something, to bring people back to the norm. And so if there's an aggression gene, we don't say, well, this person has an aggression gene and we're going to let them be aggressive. Or if somebody has a predisposition towards prostate cancer, the goal is to find some way of combating that particular prostate cancer gene. But the only exception to this seems to be homosexuality. If you can find a genetic marker for homosexuality, there isn't a standard by which you bring somebody back. Heterosexuality is in fact the standard. How do we know this? In biblical terms, it's very quite evident. God made a man, God made a woman. The anatomical parts fit. Homosexuality, just on reason alone, they don't fit. The types of things that lesbians have to go through and male homosexuals have to go through in order to have children, once again, they're extraordinary means in order for them to do this. You have Chastity Bono, who was born a girl, and she has gone through extraordinary measures to turn herself into a man. She goes now by Chaz, and she's had these operations done, and of course if you look at her today, she doesn't look anything like a woman. It's outside the norm. And so those people who claim that homosexuality is genetically determined, the problem you face is, number one, you haven't established what the norm is. Number two, just because something is genetically determined does not necessarily mean that that is a good thing. One other argument that homosexuals like to bring up, or at least supporters of homosexuality who themselves may not be homosexual. There's a case in New York where a number of Republican fundraisers are supporting homosexual marriage in the state of New York. And one of the arguments one of the donors gives is, he says, well, my son is a homosexual. I'm thinking, how is that an argument for something? If I were to say, well, my son's a thief, so therefore I'm going to support thievery, or my son is a pedophile, therefore I'm going to support pedophilia. That is not an argument. Just because one of your children engages in a certain type of behavior does not mean that that particular behavior is in fact should be supported by law, and certainly not supported by your own funds. And so the argument supporting homosexual marriage, whether it's on the genetic side or the familial side, just does not cut it. The standard of sexuality is very, very clear, both in biblical terms and in rational terms. Homosexuality really is not something that should be supported by law.